Hi, I'm Jill Witecki, the Director of Marketing for the historic Tampa Theater, and you're watching the Tampa Bay Community Network.
Hi, I'm Linda Saul-Sena. Welcome to Culture Vultures. Today, I'm so pleased to have my friend as a guest, Jill Witecki from the Tampa Theater. She's the Director of Marketing.
Thank you, Linda. I'm so glad to be here.
So, for people who have not had the joy of it, tell us a bit about the Tampa Theater.
Oh goodness, where to start? We've got 88 years of history to talk about in a half-hour show. So we'll start in 1926, which is when we first opened in downtown on Franklin Street, and we have been showing films ever since. Because you know, in 1926, films were silent, so we opened as a silent movie palace with a 21-piece orchestra that would accompany all the movies. And we've been through a lot of changes since then.
A 21-piece orchestra. That's amazing.
If you go into the theater and you see where the stage is now, picture that being an open orchestra pit where those musicians would sit and play along. And of course, the orchestra wasn't there for every show. So if we didn't have the musicians, that's when the mighty Wurlitzer theater organ would take over, and you had one musician who could play the entire movie. He had all of the notes at his disposal as well as all of the sound effects. So whether you were ringing a doorbell, or there was a train whistle going by, or a horse's hooves, all of that was built into the organ so he could fill in those special effects. And that organ is still there. We still have our original Wurlitzer in place, and we have volunteers who play it before every single movie.
That's amazing. How did one person coordinate all those sound effects?
Well, if you've ever seen a professional organist play, they've got both hands and both feet going the entire film. And in fact, if you've never seen it in action, you still can, because about once or twice a year, Tampa Theater still puts on those silent films with a guest organist, so you can come see exactly what you would have seen in 1926.
That's extraordinary. And when you walk up to the Tampa Theater, what is it like?
Well, we talk about that the show begins on the sidewalk, because in 1926, in the teens and 20s, they didn't just build movie theaters, they built movie palaces. It was a uniquely American style of architecture that really presented something that people had never seen before. You know, cinema was a relatively new art form at that time, and this was really an experience for people to go see. So when you walk up to Tampa Theater, we light up Franklin Street. We've got an 8-story marquee, and I don't think I'm telling any secrets to say that you were instrumental in getting that marquee restored back in the 90s. But an 8-story tall sign that says Tampa in flashing lights. It's got our marquee all the way around that wraps around the building. And so you know you're in the right place. You can't miss it if you're anywhere nearby. But we were designed by an architect named John Eberson. And Eberson back in the 20s was kind of the guy who was designing these American movie palaces. He built all kinds of buildings. In fact, he designed about 500 buildings all over the world, but about 100 of them were what he called atmospheric theaters. And this was a style that people had never seen before. Now, what I mean by atmospheric, you know, we in Central Florida are very familiar with this. If you think about Disney World or Universal, places that you go and it transports you out of Central Florida into another place in time. Well, that's what Eberson was trying to do, and he was doing it long before Walt Disney was doing it. He would create these buildings that gave you the sense that you were walking into an exotic place. And in the case of the Tampa Theater, we know from interviews that were published at the time that the Tampa is actually Eberson's favorite of his atmospheric theaters that he built. And when you walk in, it looks like you're in a Mediterranean courtyard. So even as you walk into the lobby, there's a night sky overhead, it's got stars in it, there's gargoyles coming over the rooftops and looking at you, and birds perched on the rooftops. And as stunning as the lobby is, that effect only gets greater when you walk into the auditorium.
You are doing the most marvelous job of describing what is a jaw-dropping experience for most people.
That is exactly what my favorite compliment when somebody new walks into the theater is when they come into that auditorium and literally their jaw drops. Their mouth opens, they look up, and they just say, wow.
I know that when you do the curtain speeches, you can see the newbies.
Oh, I always ask where they are because, you know, you can see the look on their face. We call it the Tampa Theater wow face, and it is absolutely signature to somebody who's never been in the building before. You can't walk in there and not be affected somehow. There's nobody that you will ever talk to who's been to the theater that says, Tampa Theater, it's okay. They're going to have a strong reaction. Now, the reaction may be that they saw an incredible film there, or they saw a concert that they couldn't believe was playing in their hometown, or that they sent their kids to summer film camp and had a great experience. But one way or the other, anyone who has ever experienced Tampa Theater has a very strong and usually very positive reaction to it.
And I understand that we've gotten some accolades from other places in town.
Well, that's the funniest part. When you talk to people in Tampa, they either love it, like I said, or, much to the chagrin of the marketing director, says, I've lived in Tampa my whole life and I've never been to Tampa Theater. And that just makes me sad. But when you talk to people around the world, when you talk to the art house community all across the country and around the world, they know who we are. They know who Tampa Theater is, and they respect us for what we do, to the point that just in the past year, we've been named to top 10 lists of best theaters in the world by folks.
In the world?
In the world.
That's a big market.
And often we're the only ones in the United States on the list.
Wow.
And I'm talking about media outlets like the BBC, like Vultures, like USA Today Travel, like Life magazine and Time magazine back in the day. Those are a little bit older. But we are internationally recognized for being one of the most well-preserved remaining art house movie palaces of the 20s, and also one of the most utilized theaters of our generation. A lot of these old theaters from the teens and 20s have fallen on some hard times, and we're very lucky that we're still around.
Well, it hasn't always been smooth sailing.
No, definitely has not. And for anybody that's been in Tampa for a couple of generations and remembers back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, we were not always the only movie palace in downtown Tampa. There was the Tampa on one side of the street, the Florida was right across from us, and there were several others. Now, the reason for that is how theaters were built and how they were funded back then. And if you've ever lived in a city that has a Fox Theater or a Paramount Theater or a United Artists Theater, it's no coincidence that those theaters are named after major movie production companies, because it was the movie companies that were building the theaters. So Tampa Theater was actually built with Paramount money. We were a Paramount theater, and when we opened, we only showed Paramount movies.
A sort of vertical integration of the 20s.
Very much so, to the point that along about 1948, it got them in trouble. There were a couple of things that happened in the 40s that really started to be the downturn of the American movie palace, because up to that point, through the 20s, through the 30s, this was an entertainment form that was so popular that pretty much everybody did it. If you looked at box office receipts in the 1930s, there were 90 million Americans a week going to motion pictures.
And there were only about 80 million Americans.
Exactly. So there were some repeat business there. And by comparison today, about 21 million Americans a week go to the movies. So, well, think about it. You can watch a movie on your cell phone now if you really want to.
Right.
And going to the theater isn't as special as it used to be back then. But you got to the end of the 40s and three things really happened. One, as the war came to an end and the soldiers were coming back, they started moving out of the downtown areas. So you had the flight to the suburbs, and people weren't quite as tightly packed as they were before. So people wanted entertainment that was close to their new home. They didn't want to necessarily come downtown all the time. But in 1948, there were two things that happened that really spelled the end for a lot of these theaters. The first was an invention. Any guesses in 1948?
The television.
Of course, the first television network went on air. And of course, everybody didn't have TVs right away, but that was the new thing. All of a sudden, going to the movies wasn't the new thing anymore. But the other one, and this has to do with that vertical integration, was a Supreme Court case, actually against Paramount, our parent company, that said that the movie companies, because they were making the movies, distributing the movies, and showcasing the movies, they were in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act.
Wow.
And they had to get rid of one. So it was left up to the studios. They got to decide which piece of the business they got rid of. And they decided that all of those theaters and all of those ushers and all of those staff members and all of those light bulbs they had to light up and take care of each and every day was too expensive to keep. So all of a sudden, all of these beautiful theaters all over the country that were on every main street in downtown USA were under private ownership. And they had to figure out a way for the first time to make a profit in a market that was already seeing declining audiences. So you can imagine, a lot of them in the early 50s, that was it. They closed their doors and they were demolished. They were turned over into parking lots or office buildings or strip malls, unfortunately. And we were lucky. The Tampa was lucky, and we stuck it out through the 50s and stuck it out through the 60s and tried a lot of different types of programming and a lot of different promotions to get people in the door. But by the early 70s, the writing was on the wall for us too. And we were actually slated for demolition. There were plans to tear the building down, and this beautiful Eberson Theater was going to be destroyed.
But then
the citizens of Tampa did exactly what we hope they do in any case of historic preservation of a beautiful building. And I know that's something that's near and dear to your heart, that the citizens of Tampa stepped forward and said, we have to save this building. We have a 50-year-old Eberson in our community, which is kind of like saying you have a Rembrandt in your art collection. You don't just knock that down. So the owners of the theater actually appealed to City Council and offered to sell the building for $1 if the city would just protect it. And City Council took a vote, and the vote was 4-3 against it.
That's shocking, just shocking. It's crazy that was a vote.
You would think $1, but of course it takes a lot more than $1 to take care of a building like that. And I think that's probably what City Council had in mind was, what are we going to do with an old theater that is losing money? What are we going to do with this asset? So 3 years of back and forth ensued, and committees were formed and meetings were had, and there were 2 people that stepped forward and really made the difference over those 3 years. One was former City Councilman Lee Duncan, and if you come into our lobby now, you'll see a plaque dedicated to Lee right before you go into the auditorium. So he was a huge champion for us. And the other was former Mayor Bill Poe, who just passed away recently, and we did a little tribute to him on our marquee when he did. But he was a huge champion, as you know, of downtown development and making downtown a vibrant place to be. And so he really stepped forward and was an advocate for us. And so in 1976, there was another vote, and it was still 4-3, but fortunately it was 4-3 in the other direction. And so the city of Tampa bought the building for $1.
Wow.
And has owned it ever since. We're still owned by the city of Tampa.
But the support for the theater comes from the Theater Foundation, yes?
Exactly. We are programmed and cared for by a nonprofit arts organization, and that's who I work for, is the Tampa Theater Foundation. And we're the ones responsible with taking care of everything that happens inside that building and making sure that the programming is such that we are able to keep our doors open 365 days a year, that we're able to draw 150,000 guests a year, including 30,000 school kids, which is a lot of fun. And we can talk more about what they do. But we program about 600 shows a year. And like I mentioned, we're one of the most utilized venues of our type in the country because we open our doors almost twice a day.
Amazing. We're going to take a break now, and we'll be right back to hear more about the Tampa Theater with Jill Witecki.
Change your life. Learn TV and internet video production skills at TBCN in Tampa. Become a skilled video producer quickly and inexpensively. Learn audio, editing, lighting, and camera basics. Produce multi-camera videos for TV, the internet, business, or pleasure.
Welcome to my live call-in show on Tampa Bay Community Network. You too can learn to produce and star in your own video programming, or you can have TBCN staff do it for you.
Call TBCN at 813-977-5200 today and change your life. Visit our website at tbcn.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn.
Welcome back to Culture Vultures. Linda Saul-Sena here, having the pleasure of speaking with Jill Witecki from the Tampa Theater. And activities. Let's talk about what takes place at the Tampa Theater.
Well, like I said, we open our doors 600 times a year. So even though it sounds cliche to say that we have something for everybody, we truly honestly have something for everybody. Now, when a lot of people think of Tampa Theater, they realize it's an old building, and I think there's kind of a common misconception that we are the old theater that shows old movies. And we do, we show some old movies, but we do so much more than that. And in fact, the bulk of our programming, our primary programming stream, is new movies, contemporary films, what some might call art house films, although we don't really use that term much in marketing because I think a lot of people hear art house films and they're like, oh, those are those weird foreign movies nobody wants to see. And I will admit that we do show some of the weird foreign movies that nobody wants to see, but the people who do come and see them are so grateful that we show that type of film because there's nowhere else in town you can see them. Yeah, you can pull them up on Netflix or you can get them on demand, but it's not the same. It's not the same as coming to a 1926 movie palace and getting a 15-minute Wurlitzer organ concert and seeing the organ descend into the stage and the red curtains open and being in that atmosphere for a film like that. But when I talk about art house films, independent films, I'm talking about the kind of movies that you might hear about around Oscar time. For example, in the past year, we opened The Imitation Game, we opened The Theory of Everything, we opened Boyhood, we did a special screening of The Grand Budapest Hotel, we had a several-week run of a Polish film called Ida, which, again, when your film booker calls you and says, we've got this Polish film in black and white about nuns. You say, really? Is that really a good idea? But it went on to win the Oscar for Best Foreign Film. So yeah, it was a great idea, and a lot of people came out and saw it.
I saw it, and I thought it was really good.
It was incredible.
But you know what's interesting? I don't think I would have gone if I had just read about it randomly, but the fact that it was at the Tampa Theater made me trust that it was going to be good.
Thank you. That's what curating a program is all about, that our patrons trust us, that if we put something on the screen, there's going to be some value to it. Now, it may not be your cup of tea. Not every movie we play is going to be everybody's favorite, but there is some reason that we are showing that film. And we are very fortunate to have a great film booker out in California who programs several screens around the country, but she knows us, she knows our audiences, and she's the one who goes to Sundance and goes to Toronto and sees all these films when they're coming through the festival circuit and is able to pick for us what's really going to resonate. So the one that we've got right now is a great comedy. It's called What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh, about vampires.
Yes, it's a mockumentary about vampires, and it is just blowing the doors off. People love it. But coming up after that, we've got a film, a very small, very low budget film that just knocked everybody's socks off at Sundance called It Follows. And it's a horror film. I had the pleasure of seeing it when I was in Utah earlier this year, right before Sundance. And it is just a dark, creepy horror film about this thing that once you're cursed, it follows you until it catches you. And it's It's such a simple premise, but it's absolutely horrifying. And I can't tell you how many people have walked past the theater, people who would never come to an old theater that shows old movies, and they see that poster, and we're seeing tweets and Facebook posts about, we can't believe you guys are getting It Follows, we will be there.
Wow. Now, didn't the Tampa Theater have a coup where we snatched up the film that tell us about that.
I know where you're going with this, yes.
North Korea.
Exactly. There was a little snafu with the North Korean government in a certain film called The Interview.
Thank you for...
And it was not typically the kind of movie we would ever show. You know, you're never going to come see Iron Man or The Hunger Games at Tampa Theater, any of these big studio productions that get what we call a wide release. They put them on as many screens as they can. And with only one screen, that doesn't give us a lot of room to do the big releases.
More of a boutique house.
A little bit, yeah, some specialty programming. But in the case of The Interview, when the big studio chains decided, based on the threats from North Korea, not to show it, and I don't fault them. I probably would have made the same decision or advised them to do the same if I was doing marketing for them. It opened up the opportunity for some of the smaller theaters. And we are part of an organization called the Arthouse Convergence that is an international organization of theaters like us, not all historic, but all the same kind of programming. And the Arthouse Convergence really connected with Sony and really connected with NATO, which is not the North American Trade Organization, the other NATO, which is the National Alliance of Theater Owners. And between all of them, they made it possible for some of these smaller theaters to get The Interview. So we found out on Christmas Eve that we were going to be able to open it the day after Christmas. And we did 4 late night screenings on Friday and Saturday nights, and it was incredible. Again, it drew people that had never been to Tampa Theater before, who never would have thought that we had anything for them. And they came to see the movie, they came to make a statement in putting their money behind the film, but they left with an appreciation of a cultural gem they never knew was there.
Well, one of the things that's great about you being at the Tampa Theater is that you are both young, beautiful, and techie. And so
I'll agree with none of those at all. Thank you.
False modesty. Anyway, so let's go to, how do people hear about what's going on at the theater?
Well, again, with 600 showtimes a year, we do our best to get the word out there, but we ask people to go where the information is. So we have a brand new website that we launched about 1.5 years ago. We've always been at tampatheater.org, but over the last 1.5 years, we have made so many improvements to the site to make it easier to navigate. So people can go to, and that's theater with an R-E, the old-fashioned way, tampatheater.org, and they can see everything we've got coming up. They can sort it by shows, live concerts. They can sort it by films. They can just click through the calendar and see what's coming up over the next week. They can also get information about all of our other programs, our summer camp that's coming up, and some of the other educational programming that we do.
Can they buy tickets online?
Yes.
Oh.
Finally. It took us a while to catch up with 20th century technology, but we finally have the ability for people to buy their tickets online, sign up to be a member online. Almost anything you can do at the box office, you can do online now.
So what does a person get if they're a member?
Well, it depends on the level of membership. We wanted to make sure that membership was accessible enough for somebody that just wanted that entry level, or broad enough that if they really wanted some of those premium benefits, they could get it. So our single membership, base level membership, is $50. And that gets you discounts on all your movie tickets. It gets you the opportunity for most of our concerts to buy your tickets early.
Oh, that's a big deal.
Yes, and be in the member section. It gets you 2 weeks head start registering for summer camp. And I will tell you, there are some of our sessions of summer camp that sell out before the general public ever gets access to it, because the members are there and ready for it.
So the summer camp, is it watching movies or making movies?
A little bit of both, because you have to watch them to learn how to make them. But we partner with a great organization over at USF that incorporates technology into teaching. And so this group of teachers and counselors come out, they bring all of the equipment the kids need.
Oh, wow.
It's incredible. And over 5 days, students entering grades 3 through 12 learn the entire movie making process. They get in groups, they write a script, they storyboard what it's going to look like, they light it, they shoot it. If it's a live action production, they act in it.
Oh my God, that's great.
If it's, we do stop motion animation where they can bring Legos or clay or cut paper or however they want to make their cartoon. And by Friday, they have created a movie poster. They have edited a 3 to 5 minute movie. And the last hour of camp, their parents and friends get to come and see it debut on the big screen.
That is spectacular. That's great. That's great. So to become a member, you can do it online.
You can do it online. It's got all of the different benefits. And of course, once you get into some of the higher levels of membership, then you start getting some free tickets and some member parties that we do throughout the year and some other really great benefits.
What level
there.
do you have to be for the popcorn refill?
I believe popcorn refill is right at the entry level. So
that's significant because I have to say, Tampa Theater does have the best popcorn in town.
It is well proven. We just got a new popcorn machine earlier this year, and we legitimately, according to the media, have the best popcorn in town.
I love it. I think that's great. Now, you also have the scariest bathrooms. And I say that because they're like a dungeon or a castle's, just obscure place. That's my
I will admit that the ones downstairs can be a little intimidating. But then again, we have also been called the most haunted building in town, so there might be a reason for those to be so scary.
Now, Jill, you're the person who cooked up the nightmare on Franklin Street. Would you share that with
I am a self-admitted Halloween fan. And when I got to Tampa Theater, we had some great series in place. We had our Summer Classics series that we'd been doing for 20 plus years. We had our Holiday Classics that are just a great time-honored tradition. But there were two gaps, I felt. One was Halloween, and one was some family programming. So the two series that I was lucky enough to be able to kind of generate when I got there was our Family Favorites series, which actually starts here in a couple of weeks, runs through the spring, and has all those movies that I remember from when I was a kid, and now I want moms my age to be able to show to their kids on the big
Sunday
screen.
afternoons at 3?
Sunday afternoons at 3, things like Big, Hook,
Oh, fun.
E.T. This year, Sing Along Frozen is part of the lineup.
And on the big screen, it's so much fun.
It's going to be amazing. But then the other is Nightmare on Franklin Street, and that's our opportunity to bring out all those great old horror movies, old and not so old, like The Shining and like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Freddy and Jason and all of those great slasher flicks. And the neatest part is that every year when we put the lineup together, we get phone calls from people saying, hey, by the way, I was one of the vampires in The Lost Boys.
No.
And I know you're showing it. Can I come talk to your audience after the film?
Really?
We've had Marilyn Eastman, who was in Night of the Living Dead. She's still alive. She lives here locally, and she came and did a film talk.
She's still part of the living and not the dead.
Still part of the living. And then last year, we found out that the young man who played in all of the Chucky films, he was the little boy who got the Chucky doll. He lives here in town.
Oh my God.
And actually owns a sound production studio and called us up and said, hey, would it be okay if I came and did a film talk? And the answer was absolutely.
How does the Tampa Theater run? Is it sponsorships? Is it?
We operate every day based on the generosity of our community. You know, we are a nonprofit organization, which our CEO likes to remind people is a tax status, not a funding plan. We are not trying to not make money. But what it does mean is that we are able to generate about 60% of our operating expenditures through ticket sales and popcorn and soda and all that stuff. But then the other 40% is made up of those memberships, of corporate sponsorships, of private donations, foundation donations. So we are a very healthy nonprofit because of that 60-40 split, but it means we still need our community's help.
Well, you offer so much.
Well, just very recently we had Miranda Sings, who I was not familiar with, but if you're a 13-year-old girl on YouTube, you know who she is, and we sold that show out. Last year, over the summer, we were very lucky to have Jimmy Fallon right before he took over The Tonight
Wow.
Show, live on our stage. And we've got some great concerts coming up this summer that we're not quite ready to talk about yet, but again, get on that website because when we announce them, the tickets will go fast.
That's great. Jill, thank you. You are a font
Thank
of
you for
information.
that.
This has been so much fun. And thank you for joining us here at Culture Vultures. Come back next time.